Shenandoah National Park. National parks in the USA. The story of Shenandoah National Park is a narrative written in stone, water, and leaf. A complex biological and geological document that stretches back over 1 billion years. Located in the Commonwealth of Virginia, this narrow, jagged ribbon of protected wilderness encompasses nearly 200,000 acres of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It is a park defined not by a single monolithic feature, but by the accumulation of ancient peaks, cascading watersheds, and a regenerating deciduous forest that serves as one of the most significant carbon sinks and biodiversity reservoirs in the eastern United States. To understand Shenandoah is to understand the mechanics of the Appalachian chain, the resilience of temperate forests, and the intricate web of life that thrives in the ecotone between the coastal lowlands and the interior highlands. The geographic setting of Shenandoah is distinct. The park is long and slender, stretching approximately 105 miles from Front Royal in the north to Waynesboro in the south. It essentially caps the ridge of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a subset of the Greater Appalachian System. To the east, the mountains drop off into the rolling hills of the Piedmont region. To the west, they descend sharply into the Shenandoah Valley, a rich limestone basin carved by the Shenandoah River. This positioning creates a dramatic relief, known as an escarpment, particularly on the western side. The park varies in width from less than 1 mile to about 13 miles, creating a biological corridor that is vital for migratory species, but also susceptible to edge effects from surrounding human development. The backbone of the park is traversed by the Skyline Drive, a road that follows the crest of the mountains, tracing the watershed divide. Rain falling to the east of this road eventually flows into the Rappahannock or James Rivers and on to the Chesapeake Bay, while rain falling to the west drains into the Shenandoah River, meeting the Potomac, and also eventually reaching the bay. The geological foundations of Shenandoah are among the oldest exposed rocks in the national park system, offering a window into the deep time of the North American continent. The story begins roughly 1 billion to 1.2 billion years ago during the Grenville orogeny. This was a mountain-building event of massive proportions, likely creating a range as high as the modern Himalayas. The core of these ancient mountains was formed from molten rock that cooled slowly beneath the surface, crystallizing into granite and gneiss. Today, this basement rock is visible most famously at Old Rag Mountain and Mary's Rock. Old Rag granite, a coarse-grained crystalline rock, is resistant to erosion, which is why it remains as a prominent, rocky peak, while softer surrounding materials have worn away. The large crystals of feldspar and quartz visible in the Old Rag boulders are testament to the slow cooling process deep within the crust over 1 billion years ago. Following the erosion of the Grenville Mountains, the supercontinent Rodinia began to break apart roughly 570 million years ago. As the continental plates stretched and rifted, massive fissures opened in the crust. Molten basalt lava poured out of these fissures, flooding the landscape in a series of eruptions that lasted for millions of years. This hardened lava formed a rock layer known as the Catoctin Formation. Over time, heat and pressure from subsequent geological events metamorphosed this basalt into greenstone. Catoctin greenstone is the most common rock type found in the park's high peaks, including Hawksbill and Stony Man. It is characterized by its grayish-green color, derived from minerals like chlorite and epidote, and often displays columnar jointing, a geometric fracture pattern formed as the thick lava flows cooled and contracted. The final major layer of the geological cake was laid down as the Iapetus Ocean, the precursor to the Atlantic, flooded the rifted margin of the continent. Sands, muds, and silts settled on the ocean floor, eventually compressing into sedimentary rocks like quartzite, sandstone, and shale. These form the Chilhowie Group, often found on the western flanks of the park. The mountains we see today, however, are not the direct result of these deposition events, but rather the result of the Alleghanian orogeny occurring between 325 to 260 million years ago. During this collision between the North American and African plates, the rock layers were shoved, folded, and thrust upward. Since that time, wind and water have been the primary sculptors. The Blue Ridge is essentially a fold and thrust belt that has been eroded down. The hard granite and greenstone resisted this erosion better than the limestone of the valley floor, leaving the ridge standing high above the surrounding landscape. This geological history dictates the hydrology of the park. Shenandoah is a headwater sanctuary. Because the park sits astride the ridgeline, the streams born here are cold, clear, and fast-moving. They tumble down steep gradients, creating the park's numerous waterfalls. The geology determines the shape of these falls. Where streams flow over hard, erosion-resistant greenstone or granite, they maintain a steep drop. When they hit softer rock layers, the water carves deeper, creating the plunge pools and cascades. The streams are fed by groundwater springs that seep from the fractured bedrock. The hydrology is flashy, meaning water levels rise and fall quickly with rainfall due to the steep terrain and thin soils. These streams are critical habitats for aquatic life, requiring high dissolved oxygen levels and low temperatures, conditions maintained by the shade of the forest canopy and the physical aeration of water tumbling over rocks. The biological skin covering this geological skeleton is the eastern deciduous forest. Shenandoah represents a recovered wilderness. Much of what is now parkland was logged or farmed by mountain residents prior to the park's establishment in 1935. Today, the forest is roughly 95% forested, with a significant portion returning to a mature state. This process is known as secondary succession. When farmland is abandoned, it is first colonized by grasses and herbaceous plants, followed by pines which thrive in full sunlight. As the pines grow, they create a shady understory where hardwood seedlings, oaks, hickories, and maples can survive. Eventually, the hardwoods overtop and shade out the pines, establishing the climax forest community we see today. The dominant forest type in Shenandoah is the oak-hickory forest. This association is characterized by a canopy of northern red oak, chestnut oak, white oak, and various hickory species. These trees are mast producers. Mast refers to the nuts and acorns produced by forest trees, which serve as the primary energy source for much of the park's wildlife. The production of mast is cyclical and unpredictable. In mast years, trees produce a massive abundance of nuts, overwhelming the ability of animals to consume them all, ensuring some seeds survive to germinate. In non-mast years, wildlife populations may struggle or migrate to find food. This boom and bust cycle drives the population dynamics of squirrels, deer, bears, and even the Lyme disease-carrying ticks that feed on the mammals. Interspersed within the oak-hickory matrix are cove hardwood forests. These occur in the sheltered, moist hollows and deep ravines where soil is richer and deeper. Here, the biodiversity of trees peaks. The tulip poplar, with its straight, tall trunk and distinctive leaf shape, is a king of the cove forest, often reaching great heights. Basswood, white ash, and eastern hemlock also thrive here. The hemlocks, however, are under siege. The hemlock woolly adelgid, an invasive aphid-like insect, has decimated hemlock populations across the Appalachians. These evergreen giants play a crucial role in regulating stream temperatures by shading the water year-round. Their loss threatens the brook trout populations that rely on cold water. At the highest elevations of the park, particularly on the peaks of Stony Man and Hawksbill, one encounters a distinct ecological zone that feels more northern. While Shenandoah lacks the true spruce fir forests found in the southern Appalachians or New England, the conditions here, cooler temperatures, higher wind speeds, and more precipitation, support species like yellow birch and mountain ash. These areas are relict islands, holding on to plant communities that were more widespread during the last ice age. The rocky outcrops at these heights host rare plant communities, including the Shenandoah rock tripe lichen and various saxifrages, adapted to survive desiccation and extreme cold. The flora of Shenandoah is not limited to trees. The herbaceous layer, or the forest floor, is a riot of biodiversity, particularly in the spring. Before the trees leaf out and block the sunlight, spring ephemerals complete their life cycles. Trilliums, bloodroot, hepatica, and lady slipper orchids bloom rapidly, capitalizing on the solar energy available in March and April. These plants have evolved complex relationships with pollinators. For example, the seeds of trilliums and bloodroot have lipid-rich appendages called elaiosomes. Ants collect these seeds, eat the fatty elaosome, and discard the seed in their nutrient-rich waste piles, effectively planting the next generation. This process, known as myrmecochory, is a subtle but vital interaction in the forest floor ecosystem. Moving up the trophic ladder, the fauna of Shenandoah is robust and visible. The most iconic mammal of the park is the American black bear, Ursus americanus. Shenandoah has one of the highest densities of black bears in North America. These omnivores are perfectly adapted to the deciduous forest. Their diet is 85% plant matter. In the spring, they graze on skunk cabbage and grasses. In the summer, they gorge on berries like blackberries and blueberries. In the fall, they rely heavily on the acorn mast to build fat reserves for winter. Bears in Shenandoah are not true hibernators in the physiological sense of deep freeze, but they enter a state of torpor. Their body temperature drops slightly, and their metabolic rate slows significantly, allowing them to survive months without eating, drinking, or passing waste. Interestingly, female bears, or sows, give birth during this winter's sleep. This is made possible by a reproductive strategy called delayed implantation. Although mating occurs in early summer, the fertilized egg does not implant in the uterus until late fall, and only if the mother has gained enough fat reserves. This ensures that cubs are not born into a season of scarcity if the mother is malnourished. The white-tailed deer is another keystone species in the park. Without natural predators like the gray wolf or cougar, which were extirpated from the region long ago, deer populations can fluctuate wildly based on food availability and disease. Deer are browsers, eating leaves, twigs, and herbaceous plants. When their population is too high, they can overbrowse the forest understory, altering the structure of the vegetation. They create a distinct browse line where all greenery within reach is eaten, and they can prevent the regeneration of tree seedlings, effectively stalling forest succession. This herbivory pressure forces the forest to adapt. Species that are palatable to deer may decline, while unpalatable species like hay-scented fern or invasive garlic mustard may proliferate. Predators in the park include the bobcat and the coyote. The coyote is a relatively recent arrival, expanding its range eastward to fill the niche left by wolves, though they are smaller and have a more varied diet. Bobcats are elusive, solitary hunters that prey on rabbits, squirrels, and small rodents. They are rarely seen by visitors, but are an essential part of the natural control on small mammal populations. Smaller predators like the long-tailed weasel and the barred owl also patrol the forest, maintaining the balance of the food web. Beneath the leaf litter and in the moist crevices of the rocks lies a world often overlooked, the realm of the salamanders. The Appalachian Mountains are the global center of biodiversity for lungless salamanders, family Plethodontidae. Because they lack lungs, These amphibians breathe entirely through their skin and the lining of their mouths. This cutaneous respiration requires their skin to remain moist, restricting them to damp environments. Shenandoah is home to the Shenandoah salamander, Plethodon shenandoah, a federally endangered species found nowhere else on Earth. It is restricted to high-elevation talus slopes, areas of loose, rocky debris, on just 3 mountains in the park. This species is a relic of a cooler climate. As the climate has warmed since the last glaciation, the Shenandoah salamander has retreated to these high, cool islands. It faces stiff competition from the red-backed salamander, a more aggressive and adaptable species that encroaches from the lower elevations. The interaction between these two species is a classic example of competitive exclusion and niche partitioning. The park's avian life is equally tied to the geography and seasons. Shenandoah serves as a crucial stopover on the Atlantic Flyway. In the fall, the updrafts created by the ridge allow raptors, hawks, eagles, and falcons to conserve energy as they migrate south. Birdwatchers gather at overlooks to witness the kettles of broad-winged hawks circling in the thermals. The forest interior supports neotropical migrants like the cerulean warbler, the wood thrush, and the scarlet tanager. These birds breed in the nutrient-rich forests of North America and winter in Central and South America. The decline of these species is often linked to habitat fragmentation. Shenandoah's status as a large, contiguous block of forest makes it a vital nursery for these declining populations. The blue in the Blue Ridge Mountains is a phenomenon rooted in atmospheric chemistry and biology. The distinct haze that gives the mountains their name is not merely water vapor. It is largely caused by isoprene, a volatile organic compound emitted by trees, particularly oaks and poplars. Isoprene protects trees from heat stress. When isoprene molecules are released into the atmosphere, they interact with other particles and scatter sunlight. Because blue light has a shorter wavelength, it is scattered more easily than red light, creating the blue tint when viewed from a distance. However, this natural haze is now often exacerbated by anthropogenic air pollution. Sulfate aerosols from industrial emissions can mix with the natural humidity and isoprene to create a white or gray haze that significantly reduces visibility, a problem the Park Service monitors closely. Soil ecology in Shenandoah is the silent engine of the forest. The soils are generally acidic and relatively thin, derived from the weathering of the granite and greenstone bedrock. The nutrient cycle relies heavily on the decomposition of leaf litter. Fungi and bacteria break down the fallen leaves, returning nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium to the soil to be taken up again by tree roots. This recycling is efficient but fragile. Decades of acid rain, caused by sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide emissions from coal-burning power plants upwind, have leached essential calcium from the soil in many high-elevation areas. Calcium is critical for many biological processes. Birds need it for eggshells, and snails need it for their shells. When snails decline due to calcium depletion, the birds that eat them suffer calcium deficiencies, leading to thinner eggshells and reproductive failure. This chain reaction illustrates how atmospheric chemistry directly impacts the geological and biological integrity of the park. One cannot discuss the natural history of Shenandoah without addressing the impact of non-native species. The park is under constant biological siege. The spongy moth, formerly gypsy moth, is a defoliator that feeds on oak leaves. In outbreak years, the caterpillars can strip millions of trees bare, stressing the forest and leading to widespread tree mortality. The emerald ash borer is currently devastating the ash tree population, similar to how the chestnut blight wiped out the American chestnut in the early 20th century. The American chestnut was once the dominant tree in these mountains, comprising up to 25% of the canopy. It was the quote of the East, growing massive and providing consistent mast. A fungal blight introduced from Asia killed nearly every mature chestnut tree. Today, they survive only as root sprouts, growing a few feet tall before the blight kills them back again. The loss of the chestnut fundamentally altered the forest structure and the food web, a ghost presence that still defines the ecology of the park today. The wetlands of Shenandoah, though limited in size due to the steep terrain, are highly significant. Big Meadows is a high-elevation wetland and open growing area that is an anomaly in the largely forested park. It is maintained by human intervention, mowing and prescribed fire, to preserve the open habitat, which supports rare plant species and provides hunting grounds for raptors and grazing for deer. The hydrology of Big Meadows acts as a sponge, soaking up rainfall and releasing it slowly into the headwaters of the streams. This area provides a glimpse into the complexity of managing a natural park. Sometimes, maintaining biodiversity requires active manipulation to mimic natural disturbances like fire or grazing by extinct megafauna. The climate of Shenandoah is classified as humid continental. The elevation creates a distinct weather gradient. For every 1,000 feet of elevation gain, the temperature drops by about 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. This means the ridge can be significantly cooler and wetter than the surrounding valleys. The park receives frequent precipitation, both as rain and snow, which is amplified by orographic lift. As air masses move from the west and hit the mountain barrier, they are forced upward, cool, and condense their moisture. This abundance of water drives the lush vegetation and the rapid erosion of the landscape. However, the park is also subject to ice storms. Supercooled rain freezes on contact with the trees, coating them in heavy glaze. While destructive, breaking limbs and toppling weak trees, these storms are a natural disturbance event that opens gaps in the canopy, allowing light to reach the forest floor and stimulating new growth. The interaction between the geology and the flora creates specific habitat niches known as glades and barrens. Greenstone glades are open, rocky areas where the soil is too thin to support a closed forest canopy. Here, the sun beats down, creating a microclimate that is hotter and drier than the surrounding woods. These glades support sun-loving prairie grasses and wildflowers, like the blazing star and wild bergamot. They are hotspots for butterfly diversity, including the swallowtails and fritillaries. The contrast between the cool, dark hemlock ravines and the hot, dry greenstone glades within a few miles of each other highlights the diverse mosaic of habitats contained within the park's narrow boundaries. Fire ecology plays a nuanced role in Shenandoah. While the moist hardwood forests are not as fire-dependent as the pine forests of the Deep South or the West, fire has historically influenced the landscape. Native Americans used fire to clear underbrush and improve hunting grounds. Lightning strikes also cause occasional fires. Oaks, with their thick bark and deep roots, are adapted to survive low-intensity surface fires. These fires help oak regeneration by reducing competition from fire-intolerant species like red maple and beech. The suppression of fire over the last century has led to a process called mesofication, where the forest becomes denser, darker, and moister, favoring maples over oaks. Park managers now use prescribed burns in specific areas to restore this natural ecological process and maintain the health of the oak hickory community. The aquatic ecosystems within the park are defined by their isolation. The waterfalls that delight visitors act as barriers to fish migration. This means that fish populations above major falls have been isolated for millennia, evolving independently. The brook trout, Salvininus fontinalis, is the only trout native to these waters. It requires cold, highly oxygenated water and clean gravel for spawning. The presence of brook trout is a bioindicator of high water quality. They are threatened not only by warming water temperatures but also by acid deposition and competition from introduced brown and rainbow trout in the lower reaches of the watershed. The struggle of the brook trout is emblematic of the broader struggle of cold-adapted species in a warming world. The changing seasons in Shenandoah are not merely aesthetic shifts but profound biological triggers. Phenology is the study of the timing of these natural events. In Shenandoah, the timing of leaf-out, blooming, and migration is tightly synchronized. If the spring warms up too early, plants may bloom before their pollinators arrive, or birds may arrive after the peak of insect abundance. This phenological mismatch is a growing concern for ecologists. The synchronization of the natural world relies on reliable cues from temperature and photoperiod, day length. While photoperiod remains constant, temperature is becoming more variable, introducing chaos into these ancient rhythms. The night sky over Shenandoah is another natural resource, though one that is increasingly threatened. The park serves as a refuge for darkness in the rapidly developing East Coast megalopolis. Nocturnal animals rely on true darkness for hunting, mating, and navigation. Salamanders, for instance, are most active on dark, wet nights. Artificial light pollution from nearby towns can disrupt these behaviors. The park's efforts to maintain dark skies are crucial for the survival of moths, bats, and other nocturnal biota. The preservation of the night is as much about ecological integrity as it is about the human experience of the wilderness. The rock outcrops of Shenandoah also tell a story of structural geology. The rocks are not just piled up, they are folded and faulted. The collision that formed the Appalachians was so intense that it shortened the crust, stacking layers on top of each other. In many road cuts along Skyline Drive, one can see the layers of rock bent into waves, called anticlines, upward folds, and syncclines, downward folds. Sometimes the rock cracked under the pressure, creating faults. These physical deformities in the rock affect how water moves through the mountain, directing springs and shaping the drainage patterns that define the hollows. In the realm of entomology, the park hosts a staggering variety of insects, which are the foundational movers of energy in the ecosystem. From the microscopic soil mites that break down organic matter to the large Luna moths that flit through the canopy, insects facilitate pollination, decomposition, and serve as the primary food source for birds, amphibians, and small mammals. The tiger swallowtail butterfly is a common sight in the summer, puddling on wet soil to obtain salts and minerals. The biological interactions are specific. For example, the caterpillars of the spicebush swallowtail mimic snake heads to deter predators and feed exclusively on spicebush and sassafras plants. The sensory landscape of Shenandoah is dominated by sound as well as sight. The acoustic environment is shaped by the topography. The ridges block noise from the valleys, creating pockets of profound silence where natural sounds, the wind in the trees, the call of a pileated woodpecker, the rush of water, predominate. This acoustic ecology is vital for animal communication. Birds use song to defend territory and attract mates. Wolves and coyotes howl to coordinate the pack. Anthropogenic noise pollution can mask these signals, increasing stress and reducing reproductive success. The concept of wilderness in Shenandoah is unique because it is a designated wilderness in the eastern U.S., protected under the Wilderness Act of 1964. Approximately 40% of the park is federally designated wilderness. This legal status adds a layer of protection that strictly limits human intervention. In these zones, nature is allowed to take its course without the use of mechanized equipment. Trails are maintained with hand tools, and fallen trees are often left to rot. contributing to the biomass of the forest floor. This designation acknowledges the intrinsic value of the land independent of human utility, preserving the genetic reservoirs and evolutionary processes of the Blue Ridge. The interconnectedness of the park's ecosystems is best understood through the flow of energy. Solar energy is captured by the canopy, converted into sugars, and stored in leaves and wood. This energy flows to the herbivores, the deer, the caterpillars, the squirrels. It is then transferred to the carnivores, the bears, who are functionally omnivores, the bobcats, the hawks. Finally, the decomposers, the fungi, bacteria, and carrion beetles, break down the dead matter, returning the nutrients to the soil to fuel the trees once more. This cycle is seamless and continuous, driven by the geology that provides the stage and the climate that sets the tempo. As the seasons turn, the park undergoes a dramatic transformation in autumn. The breakdown of chlorophyll in the leaves reveals the other pigments that have been present all along: carotenoids, yellows and oranges, and anthocyanins, reds and purples. The specific mix of colors in Shenandoah is determined by the species composition: the deep red of the oaks, the brilliant yellow of the poplars, the orange of the maples. This senescence is a survival strategy, allowing trees to shed their delicate photosynthetic organs before the freezing temperatures and heavy snows of winter can cause damage. The fallen leaves form a vital, insulating blanket for the forest floor, protecting roots and dormant seeds from the harsh cold. Shenandoah National Park stands as a biological island in a sea of development. Its boundaries enclose a complex, functioning ecosystem that has regenerated from the scars of human use to become a testament to the resilience of the Appalachian hardwood forest. From the ancient billion-year-old granite of Old Rag to the fleeting bloom of a trillium in the spring, the park is a mosaic of timescales and biological interactions. It captures the essence of the Blue Ridge, the ancient rounded mountains, the hazy blue distance, the diverse and thriving temperate rainforest. While the geological strata and forest canopy define the physical reality of Shenandoah, the landscape is equally shaped by a profound human history that predates the establishment of the park by over 10 millennia, a history that is often obscured by the regenerating wilderness, but remains etched into the soil and the genetic makeup of the forest. The seemingly pristine woodlands viewed from the Skyline Drive are not a remnant of an untouched pre-Columbian Eden, but rather a palimpsest, a manuscript that has been written upon, erased, and written over again. To fully comprehend the ecology of these mountains, one must acknowledge that for thousands of years, the Blue Ridge was a managed landscape, manipulated by indigenous peoples who understood the intricate connections between fire, forest structure, and game populations long before the concept of ecology was formalized by Western science. The archaeological record within Shenandoah National Park reveals a timeline of human habitation stretching back to the Paleo-Indian period, roughly 11,000 years ago. Artifacts recovered from the park, particularly projectile points made of jasper and quartzite, indicate that these early inhabitants were highly mobile hunter-gatherers who utilized the high ridges not for permanent settlement, but as seasonal hunting grounds and quarries. The geology of the Blue Ridge provided crucial resources. Specific outcrops of jasper and cryptocrystalline rock were prized for tool-making. These lithic materials were not merely local commodities, but part of a vast trade network that moved stone hundreds of miles across the continent. The presence of non-local stone in the park suggests that the Blue Ridge was a permeable boundary, a zone of transit and exchange rather than an isolated barrier. By the late Woodland period, spanning from approximately 900 AD to 1600 AD, The human ecology of the region had shifted toward a more sedentary agricultural lifestyle centered in the floodplains of the Shenandoah and Rappahannock rivers. The peoples inhabiting the lands to the east and west of the Blue Ridge, ancestors of the Monacan and Manahoac nations, spoke Siouan languages, culturally distinct from the Algonquian-speaking Powhatan chiefdoms of the coastal plain. For these groups, the mountains served as a, quote, commons, a shared resource zone used for hunting large game like elk, deer, and bison, which were present in the region at that time. Crucially, these indigenous managers employed fire as a primary tool of landscape architecture. By setting low-intensity ground fires, they cleared the underbrush, facilitated travel, and promoted the growth of nut-bearing trees and berry bushes. This anthropogenic burning created an open, park-like woodland with a grassy understory, a habitat structure that maximized the carrying capacity for game animals. The wild forest that European settlers later encountered was, in fact, a feral garden, largely shaped by indigenous burning practices. When these practices ceased due to colonization and disease, the forest canopy closed, leading to the dense, shade-tolerant environments we see today, a radical ecological shift that obscured the open vistas of the past. The biological rhythms of the park are inextricably linked to the complex climatology of the Appalachian Range, which functions as a massive weather divide. One of the most fascinating atmospheric phenomena in Shenandoah is the occurrence of thermal belts. On clear, calm nights, radiational cooling causes the ground to lose heat rapidly. Cold, dense air, being heavier than warm air, flows down the mountain slopes like water, pooling in the valleys below. This drainage creates a temperature inversion where the valley floors are significantly colder than the ridge tops. Consequently, a band of warmer air becomes trapped midway up the slopes. This thermal belt has profound ecological implications. It allows for a longer growing season and protects sensitive vegetation from early and late frosts. Historically, mountain residents recognized this phenomenon and planted their apple orchards within this zone to ensure fruit set. Biologically, this creates microhabitats where plant phenology, the timing of biological events like flowering, is accelerated compared to both the higher peaks and the lower valleys. Winter in Shenandoah brings a specific form of precipitation that sculpts the high-elevation forest, rime ice. Unlike freezing rain, which falls as liquid and freezes on impact, rime ice forms when supercooled water droplets in fog or clouds contact a solid surface and freeze instantly. Because the Blue Ridge is frequently shrouded in clouds during the winter, the trees on the peaks of Stony Man and Hawksbill are often encased in heavy, white crystalline feathers of ice. This load can be immense, snapping branches and shaping the flagged appearance of conifers on the windward side of the ridge. The broken limbs contribute to the coarse, woody debris on the forest floor, a critical habitat for salamanders and small mammals. Furthermore, when the rime ice melts, it provides a significant input of water to the soil, functioning as a form of occult precipitation that sustains the high-elevation hydrological budget even in the absence of snow or rain. In the realm of avian ecology, the peregrine falcon represents a triumph of conservation biology within the park. By the mid-20th century, the peregrine falcon had been extirpated from the eastern United States due to the widespread use of DDT, an organochlorine pesticide that caused eggshell thinning and reproductive failure. Following the ban of DDT, Shenandoah became a focal point for restoration efforts. The park's geology offered ideal habitat. The towering cliffs of greenstone and granite provided the necessary vertical relief for these aerial predators. Through a process called hacking, young captive-bred falcons were placed in artificial nesting boxes on cliffs and fed until they could hunt on their own. Today, the park supports several breeding pairs. These birds are the fastest animals on the planet, capable of reaching speeds over 200 miles per hour during a hunting stoop. Their presence regulates the populations of smaller birds and serves as a bioindicator of low contaminant levels in the environment. The sight of a peregrine patrolling the airspace above Old Rag is a testament to the reversibility of some anthropogenic damage. The nocturnal fauna of Shenandoah includes a diverse community of bats, whose silent ecological services are often undervalued. The park is home to species such as the big brown bat, the little brown bat, and the eastern red bat. These mammals are voracious insectivores, consuming thousands of mosquitoes, moths, and agricultural pests every night. However, the bat populations of the Blue Ridge are currently at the center of a biological tragedy caused by white nose syndrome. This disease is caused by an invasive fungus, Pseudogymnoascus destructans, which thrives in the cold, humid conditions of caves and mines where bats hibernate. The fungus attacks the bare skin of the bats, their muzzles and wings, while they are in deep torpor. The irritation causes them to wake up frequently during the winter, burning through their stored fat reserves. Starving and dehydrated, many bats fly out of the caves into the freezing winter air in a desperate search for insects that are not there, leading to mass mortality. The collapse of bat populations threatens to unravel the nocturnal food web and increase the prevalence of insect pests, demonstrating the fragility of ecosystems in the face of invasive pathogens. Another secretive mammal of the canopy is the southern flying squirrel. Strictly nocturnal, these large-eyed rodents are rarely seen by visitors but are surprisingly common. They do not fly in the true sense but glide using a membrane of skin called the patagium, which stretches from their wrists to their ankles. This adaptation allows them to travel from tree to tree without descending to the forest floor, avoiding terrestrial predators like bobcats and foxes. Flying squirrels are also one of the few mammals that fluoresce under ultraviolet light, glowing a soft pink, a phenomenon whose biological function is still a subject of scientific debate. Their diet is heavily reliant on truffles, underground fruiting bodies of fungi. By digging up and consuming these truffles, flying squirrels play a crucial role in dispersing fungal spores throughout the forest, facilitating the mycorrhizal associations that trees depend on for nutrient uptake. The invertebrate world of Shenandoah is dominated by the periodic emergence of cicadas, a phenomenon that transforms the acoustic and nutrient landscape of the forest. The park hosts broods of periodical cicadas, specifically the 17-year Mojica cicada species. These insects spend nearly 2 decades underground as nymphs, feeding on the xylem fluid of tree roots. Then, in a synchronized mass emergence triggered by soil temperature, millions of individuals surface simultaneously. This strategy, known as predator satiation, overwhelms predators. Birds, squirrels, and bears eat until they are full, yet the vast majority of the cicadas survive to reproduce. The deafening chorus of the males, produced by vibrating tymbals on their abdomens, can reach 100 decibels. After mating and laying eggs, the adults die. Their decaying bodies provide a massive pulse of nitrogen and phosphorus to the forest floor, a fertilization event that can result in a measurable increase in tree growth in the years following an emergence. The aquatic ecology of the park extends beyond fish to a diverse array of macroinvertebrates that serve as the foundation of the stream food web. Stoneflies, mayflies, and caddisflies spend the majority of their lives as aquatic larvae, hiding beneath the cobbles of the mountain streams. These organisms are highly sensitive to pollution, sedimentation, and temperature changes, making them excellent indicators of watershed health. The giant stonefly, Pteronarces, plays a vital role as a treader, breaking down the tough leaves that fall into the stream and converting coarse particulate organic matter into fine organic matter that can be utilized by other organisms. This processing of leaf litter is the primary energy input for these headwater streams, which are often too shaded to support significant algae growth. The transformation of a stonefly from a gill-breathing aquatic nymph to a winged terrestrial adult represents a transfer of energy from the aquatic to the terrestrial ecosystem as these insects become food for birds and bats along the riparian corridor. Deep within the soil matrix, a less visible but equally complex network binds the forest together: the mycorrhizal fungal network. In Shenandoah's oak-hickory forests, the roots of the trees are colonized by ectomycorrhizal fungi. These fungi form a sheath around the tree roots and extend their hyphae, microscopic filaments, far into the soil. The relationship is symbiotic. The tree provides the fungus with sugars produced through photosynthesis, and in return, the fungus provides the tree with water and hard-to-access nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, which the hyphae can extract from the mineral soil more efficiently than plant roots. Recent research suggests that these fungal networks can link multiple trees, even of different species, into a wood-wide web, allowing for the transfer of carbon and chemical signals between plants. This underground economy is essential for the resilience of the forest, enabling seedlings to survive in the deep shade by receiving carbon subsidies from established canopy trees. The geological history of the park also manifests in the paraglacial features found at high elevations, such as the boulder fields of Black Rock Summit. These stark, treeless areas of broken rock are not the result of landslides in the traditional sense, but remnants of the Pleistocene ice ages. Although glaciers never reached the Blue Ridge, the climate was paraglacial, intensely cold with a tundra-like environment. The repeated cycles of freezing and thawing shattered the quartzite bedrock through a process called frost wedging. Water would seep into cracks in the rock, freeze and expand, prying the rock apart. Over thousands of years, the shattered boulders moved slowly down the slope over a layer of permafrost, a process known as solifluction. Today, these block fields are stable, but they provide a unique habitat for the rock vole and various lichens that are adapted to the exposed, sun-baked conditions that contrast sharply with the surrounding forest. Shenandoah's biodiversity is also characterized by its sky islands, high-elevation habitats that are ecologically distinct from the lowlands. These peaks serve as refugia for northern species that were pushed south during the last glacial maximum and were left stranded as the climate warmed. The red spruce is a prime example. While not as abundant as in the Great Smoky Mountains, pockets of red spruce and balsam fir exist in Shenandoah, struggling to persist at the southern limit of their range. These evergreen islands support specific bird species like the winter wren and the golden-crowned kinglet, which are typically associated with the boreal forests of Canada. The genetic isolation of these populations makes them valuable for understanding how species adapt to climate change, but it also makes them vulnerable. With nowhere higher to migrate, they face the risk of extinction by elevation as temperatures rise. The cultural history of the park includes the era of the mountain residents, the families who lived in the Blue Ridge prior to the park's creation. Unlike the romanticized notion of isolated hillbillies, these communities were integrated into the regional economy, farming corn, raising livestock, and harvesting chestnuts and timber. The establishment of the park in the 1930s involved the use of eminent domain, displacing hundreds of families. The physical remnants of their lives, stone foundations, chimney falls, rock walls, and cemeteries, are scattered throughout the wilderness. These artifacts are slowly being reclaimed by nature. Roots dislodge hearthstones, and moss covers the erratic fieldstones. However, the biological legacy remains in the form of wolf trees. These are massive, wide-spreading oaks that once stood alone in open pastures, allowing their branches to grow outward rather than upward. Now surrounded by straight-trunked second-growth forest, these gnarled giants stand as living markers of the former agricultural landscape, providing unique structural complexity to the forest canopy. Among the botanical curiosities of the park is the stiff gentian, a plant that challenges the simplistic view of seasons. Blooming late in the autumn, often into November, it offers a final nectar source when most other flowers have withered. Its survival strategy relies on the specific behavior of bumblebees, which are strong enough to force open the closed petals of the flower to access the nectar. This exclusive relationship ensures that the pollen is not wasted on ineffective pollinators. Similarly, the witch hazel is a shrub that blooms in the late fall or even winter, producing spidery yellow flowers that curl up during freezing temperatures and unfurl when the sun warms them. Its seeds take a full year to mature and are expelled explosively from the capsule, flung up to 30 feet away, an adaptation that reduces competition between the parent plant and its offspring. The conflict between preservation and recreation is nowhere more evident than in the management of the park's air quality. Shenandoah acts as a collection basin for atmospheric pollutants generated in the industrial Midwest and the Ohio River Valley. The geography that creates the scenic ridges also intercepts air masses loaded with sulfur and nitrogen. Acid deposition, acid rain, snow, and fog has altered the soil chemistry, leaching out calcium and releasing toxic aluminum, which damages tree roots and poisons aquatic life. While regulations like the Clean Air Act have improved conditions, the recovery of the soil buffering capacity is measured in geological time, not human time. The critical load of pollutants, the threshold below which no harmful effects occur, is still exceeded in many parts of the park, making the invisible chemical climate as important as the visible weather. In the understory, the pawpaw tree offers a taste of the tropical past. As the only member of the tropical custard apple family, Ananaceae, to venture this far north, the pawpaw produces the largest edible fruit native to North America. Its maroon flowers smell like rotting meat to attract carrion beetles and flies for pollination, a strategy common in tropical biology but rare in the temperate zone. The clonal nature of pawpaw patches, where a single root system sends up multiple stems, creates dense thickets that provide shelter for wildlife. The fruit, rich in proteins and fats, is a crucial late-summer food source for bears and foxes, linking this tropical outlier to the survival of the temperate fauna. The intricate dance of predator and prey in Shenandoah is further exemplified by the relationship between the timber rattlesnake and small mammals. The timber rattlesnake is a docile ambush predator that plays a critical role in controlling rodent populations, which in turn checks the prevalence of tick-borne diseases. These snakes rely on communal dens, or hibernacula, located in deep rock crevices to survive the winter. Generations of snakes return to the same den year after year. This site fidelity makes them vulnerable to poaching and habitat disturbance. The yellow and black color phases of the timber rattlesnake found in the park are genetic variations, not distinct subspecies, providing camouflage against the dappled sunlight of the forest floor or the dark rocks of the talus slopes. The concept of baseline in Shenandoah is fluid. When we look at the forest today, we are seeing a system in flux, recovering from the blight that removed the American chestnut. The chestnut was a foundational species, a reliable mast producer that grew rapidly and rot-resistant wood. Its removal left a gaping ecological hole. The oaks and hickories that filled this void are less consistent in their nut production and grow more slowly. The forest we see is, in a sense, a novel ecosystem, a combination of species and interactions that has never existed in this exact configuration before. The ghost of the chestnut is present in the stump sprouts that still emerge, genetic echoes of giants that once dominated the canopy, reminding us that the composition of the forest is never static. Specific attention must be paid to the seepage swamps, rare wetland communities found on the slopes where groundwater discharges to the surface. These habitats are distinct from the valley floodplains. They support specialized plants like the skunk cabbage, which is thermogenic. It can generate its own heat through metabolic processes, melting the snow around it in late winter to bloom before any other plant. The heat also volatilizes the foul odor that attracts the carrion-feeding insects it needs for pollination. These swamps are hotspots for biodiversity, harboring rare sedges and serving as breeding grounds for amphibians like the wood frog, whose quacking call is one of the earliest sounds of spring in the mountains. The interaction of wind and trees shapes the physical form of the forest at the highest elevations. This is known as krummholz, or crooked wood. On the exposed western faces of the peaks, constant strong winds damage the tissue on the windward side of the trees and desiccate the needles. Growth is restricted to the leeward side, causing the trees to grow horizontally, hugging the ground to stay within the boundary layer of relatively calm air. This stunted, mat-like growth form allows spruces and firs to survive in conditions that would kill a vertical tree. These krummholz formations are ancient, with small shrubs often being as old as tall trees in the protected hollows, illustrating how microclimate dictates morphology. The narrative of Shenandoah is also written in the behavior of its invasive species. The Japanese stiltgrass is a pervasive annual grass that carpets the forest floor, thriving in the disturbed soil along roads and trails. It outcompetes native vegetation, altering the soil chemistry and inhibiting the regeneration of hardwood seedlings. Its spread is facilitated by the movement of deer, which do not eat the stiltgrass but disturb the soil, creating a seedbed, and by hikers who unknowingly carry the tiny seeds on their boots. This highlights the role of humans as vectors for biological change, unintentionally homogenizing the flora of the world. The management of such species is a constant battle of containment, acknowledging that eradication is likely impossible, and that the goal is to preserve functional native communities amidst the invasion. Even the rocks themselves host a specific biological community. The lichens found on the quartzite and greenstone boulders are symbiotic organisms, a partnership between a fungus and an alga or cyanobacteria. These slow-growing crusts are the primary colonizers of bare rock, secreting acids that slowly dissolve the minerals, initiating the process of soil formation. The specific species of lichen can tell a story of air quality. Sensitive fruticose lichens, which look like tiny shrubs, are absent in areas with high sulfur dioxide pollution, while hardy crustose lichens persist. The map lichen, Rhizocarpon geographicum, with its distinct neon green and black pattern, can live for centuries, its size serving as a biological clock to date the exposure of the rock surface. The hydrology of Shenandoah is not just about surface water. It is about the hyperheic zone, the region beneath and alongside the stream bed where shallow groundwater and surface water mix. This zone is a biological reactor, teeming with microbes and small invertebrates that purify the water by breaking down nutrients and pollutants. The upwelling and downwelling of water between the stream and the hyperheic zone regulate the stream's temperature and chemistry. It is a hidden river beneath the river, essential for the spawning of brook trout, which bury their eggs in the gravel to take advantage of the oxygen-rich water flowing through this subterranean layer. In the end, the detailed examination of Shenandoah National Park reveals a landscape of immense complexity, where the geological, biological, and cultural strands are woven into a tight fabric. It is a place where the Ice Age legacy of a boulder field sits beside the industrial legacy of acid rain, where the ancient migration of the peregrine falcon intersects with the modern restoration efforts of park biologists. It is a dynamic system where the death of a chestnut tree opens the canopy for a tulip poplar, and where the emergence of a cicada feeds the forest that sustains the bear. The park is a laboratory of resilience, demonstrating how life persists and adapts in the rugged, ancient spine of the North American continent. To comprehend the living biological tapestry of Shenandoah National Park, one must first descend into the abyssal depths of geologic time. For the very distribution of the forests, the chemistry of the streams, and the migration patterns of the fauna are dictated by the mineral composition and structural history of the bedrock beneath. The transition from a biological view to a geological deep dive reveals that the park is not merely a collection of mountains, but the eroded stump of a tectonic collision so massive it assembled a supercontinent. The story continues by examining the specific mechanisms of how these ancient rocks shape the modern climate, creating a feedback loop where the land shapes the weather and the weather reshapes the land, a dynamic process that defines the physical reality of the Blue Ridge. The basement complex of Shenandoah, the fundamental platform upon which all else rests, is a relic of the Grenville orogeny, a mountain-building event that occurred roughly 1.1 billion years ago. This was not a localized event, but a global tectonic suture that stitched together the supercontinent Rodinia. The rocks formed during this period, primarily visible in the park as the Old Rag Granite and the Peddler Formation, are plutonic in origin. This means they did not erupt from volcanoes, but crystallized slowly from magma chambers deep within the Earth's crust, insulated by miles of overlying rock. The Old Rag Granite is chemically distinct. It is a coarse-grained alkali granite, rich in potassium feldspar and blue quartz. The blue tint of the quartz is a microscopic phenomenon caused by the scattering of light by tiny inclusions of rutile, titanium dioxide, needles trapped within the crystal lattice, a clue to the immense pressures and chemical environments present during its formation. This rock is incredibly resistant to chemical weathering, which is why Old Rag Mountain stands as a lonely, jagged monolith today. While the surrounding softer rocks were dissolved and washed away over eons, the stubborn granite remained, an Inselberg or island mountain, rising above the receding landscape. Contrasting with the granite is the Peddler Formation, a complex assemblage of charnockite and gneiss. Charnockite is a high-grade metamorphic rock that resembles granite but contains pyroxene, indicating it formed under conditions of higher temperature and pressure, effectively cooked deep in the root of the ancient Grenville Mountains. These basement rocks form the core of the Blue Ridge anticlinorium, a massive arch-like fold in the Earth's crust. When hikers traverse the central district of the park, they are effectively walking on the exposed core of a mountain range that once rivaled the Himalayas in height, now worn down to its deepest roots. The incredible age of these rocks means they have been subjected to multiple cycles of metamorphism, fracturing, and healing, creating a rock mass that is mechanically stiff but riddled with faults and joints that govern the movement of groundwater. Overlying this ancient basement is the Catoctin Formation, a geologic layer that tells a story of fire and rifting. Approximately 570 million years ago, the supercontinent Rodinia began to tear apart. The crust stretched and thinned, creating deep fissures through which basaltic magma erupted. These were not explosive, cone-building volcanoes like Mount St. Helens, but rather flood basalts, similar to the modern eruptions in Iceland or Hawaii. Layer upon layer of fluid lava poured out, covering the landscape in a blanket thousands of feet thick. As these thick lava flows pooled and cooled, they contracted. The physics of this cooling process resulted in a specific fracture pattern known as columnar jointing, where the rock cracks into hexagonal or pentagonal columns perpendicular to the cooling surface. This geometric fracturing is strikingly visible at the compasses on the Appalachian Trail or the cliffs of Little Stony Man. Over hundreds of millions of years, the iron-rich minerals in the basalt, such as pyroxene and olivine, reacted with hot groundwater during burial metamorphism to form chlorite and epidote, turning the black basalt into the greenstone we see today. This chemical transformation is crucial for the modern ecosystem because greenstone weathers into a circumneutral, clay-rich soil that is high in magnesium and calcium, supporting a richer, more diverse flora than the acidic, nutrient-poor soils derived from the old rag granite. The third major geological chapter is recorded in the Chilhowie Group, a sequence of sedimentary rocks that marks the birth of the Iapetus Ocean, the precursor to the Atlantic. As the rifting that created the Catoctin lavas continued, the continents separated and a new ocean basin formed. The edges of the continent subsided and were flooded by shallow seas. The sediments deposited in these environments, sands on the beaches, muds in the lagoons, lithified into the quartzites, phyllites, and shales of the Chilhowie Group. The Weaverton Formation, a hard quartzite, creates many of the ridges on the western flank of the park. Within these rocks, one can find the fossilized burrows of Scolithos linearis, an ancient worm-like organism that lived in the vertical tubes in the tidal sands. These trace fossils are among the oldest evidence of multicellular life in the park, signaling a transition from an abiotic volcanic landscape to one teeming with primitive marine life. The presence of these ocean floor rocks at the top of the mountains today is the ultimate evidence of the tectonic forces that later shoved the ocean floor skyward. The architecture of the mountains as we see them today is the result of the Alleghanian orogeny, the collision between North America and Africa roughly 300 million years ago during the formation of Pangaea. This collision acted like a bulldozer, pushing the rock layers from east to west. The rigid Blue Ridge rocks were thrust up and over the younger limestone rocks of the Shenandoah Valley. This structural geometry is defined as a, quote, thrust sheet. The Blue Ridge is essentially a slab of rock that has been disconnected from its roots and shoved dozens of miles to the west. This creates a distinct geological boundary on the western edge of the park, often marked by the Blue Ridge Central Appalachian Thrust Fault System. The fluids driven by this tectonic squeezing often precipitated minerals in the cracks, leading to veins of milky quartz and occasionally deposits of copper ore, which were mined sporadically in the 19th century, leaving behind small pits and spoil piles that are now reclaimed by the forest. Following the uplift, the dominant force shifted from tectonics to geomorphology, the science of landscape evolution through erosion. For the last 200 million years, the primary story has been the relentless dismantling of the mountains by water and chemical weathering. The Blue Ridge stands high today not because it is being actively pushed up, but due to a principle called differential erosion. The greenstone and quartzite are chemically stable and physically hard. They resist the attack of acidic rainwater. The limestones in the Shenandoah Valley, however, are easily dissolved by carbonic acid in rain. Therefore, the valley floor lowered faster than the ridges, increasing the relief. This process is aided by isostatic rebound. As millions of tons of rock are eroded off the mountains, the weight on the Earth's crust decreases, and the crust floats slightly higher on the mantle. much like a ship rising in the water as cargo is unloaded. This buoyant uplift rejuvenates the mountains, keeping them elevated despite the constant erosion. The drainage patterns of the park reveal the history of this erosion. The concept of stream piracy or stream capture is evident in the landscape. Millions of years ago, ancestral rivers flowed from the Blue Ridge across the Piedmont to the ocean. As the Shenandoah River carved out the valley to the west, its tributaries eroded backwards, into the mountains, intercepting and capturing the headwaters of the streams flowing east. This aggressive erosion created the wind gaps, notches in the ridgeline like Thornton Gap and Swift Run Gap, which were once water gaps occupied by rivers. When the river was diverted, the notch remained, dry and abandoned, now serving as convenient passes for human engineering like Route 211 and Route 33. These gaps are fossil riverbeds suspended in the air, a testament to a hydrography that no longer exists. The climate that acts upon this geology is a dynamic system driven by the interaction of latitude, elevation, and continentality. Shenandoah lies within the humid subtropical climate zone, but its elevation imparts characteristics of a humid continental climate. The defining mechanism of the park's weather is orographic lift. As prevailing westerly winds cross the Shenandoah Valley and hit the wall of the Blue Ridge, the air is forced upward. As it rises, it expands and cools adiabatically at a rate of approximately 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit per 1,000 feet in dry air, or roughly 3 degrees in saturated air. This cooling causes water vapor to condense into clouds and precipitation. Consequently, the crest of the Blue Ridge receives significantly more rainfall, up to 60 inches annually, than the valley floor just a few miles away. This orographic squeeze wrings out the moisture, supporting the lush hardwood forests and perennial streams even during regional droughts. The park also experiences a phenomenon known as cold air damming. This occurs when a high-pressure system to the north pushes cold, dense air down the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains. The mountains block this heavy air from moving west, trapping it against the eastern slopes. If a warmer, moisture-laden, low-pressure system moves in from the south and rides over this wedge of cold air, the falling rain freezes upon passing through the cold layer, creating the devastating ice storms that periodically prune the forest canopy. These storms are a major disturbance regime, shaping the structural complexity of the forest by toppling weak trees and creating gaps for new growth. The mechanical load of ice can strip a hardwood tree of 90% of its crown, resetting its growth trajectory and altering the competitive balance between species. Seasonal changes in Shenandoah are governed by the tilt of the Earth, but the biological response, or phenology, is finely tuned to the specific microclimates created by the topography. Spring moves up the mountain at a rate of about 100 feet per day. A hiker can start at the boundary in May and walk through full summer foliage, ascend through spring bud break, and reach the winter-dormant summit in a single afternoon. This green-up wave is visible from space. The trigger for this explosion of life is not just temperature, but the accumulation of growing degree days, a measure of heat accumulation. However, the geology creates exceptions. The cold air drainage mentioned earlier means that the valley bottoms often freeze later into the spring than the thermal belts on the mid-slopes. This inversion allows the mid-slope coves to host species that are sensitive to late frosts, creating a band of biodiversity that is altitudinally distinct. Summer in the park brings the challenge of evapotranspiration. The immense surface area of the billions of leaves in the forest acts as a pump, moving millions of gallons of water from the soil to the atmosphere. This transpiration creates the high humidity characteristic of the Appalachian summer. It also contributes to the formation of afternoon thunderstorms. The mountains act as trigger points for convection. The sun heats the south-facing rocky slopes, greenstone glades, more intensely than the forested hollows. These rising thermals initiate the formation of cumulus towers that mature into thunderstorms. The hydrology of the park during summer is flashy. Because the soils are shallow and the slopes are steep, heavy summer downpours result in rapid runoff. The streams can rise from a trickle to a raging torrent in minutes, scouring the stream and redistributing the substrate, a process that maintains the gravel beds required for trout spawning. Autumn in Shenandoah is a biochemical dismantling of the photosynthetic machinery. As day length shortens, a signal that is consistent regardless of weather, trees begin to form an abscission layer at the base of the leaf stem. This corky layer cuts off the flow of water and nutrients. The green chlorophyll, which is constantly produced during the summer, degrades and is not replaced. This unmasks the carotenoids and xanthophylls, yellows and oranges, that were present in the leaf all along as accessory pigments helping to capture light. The reds and purples, anthocyanins, however, are actively manufactured by some species like oaks and maples in the fall. The production of anthocyanins requires sugar and sunlight. Therefore, the brightest fall colors occur when days are sunny, high sugar production, and nights are cool but not freezing, preventing the sugar from moving out of the leaf. The specific geology of the park influences this display. Trees on the nutrient-poor granitic soils often turn color earlier due to stress compared to those on the richer greenstone soils. Winter reveals the skeleton of the landscape. With the leaves gone, the geological formations, the cliffs, the talus slopes, the distinct V-shape of the fluvial valleys become visible. The biological activity shifts to the subnivean zone, the area between the ground and the snowpack. Snow is an excellent insulator. Even when the air temperature is below zero, the ground temperature often remains near freezing. In this protected space, shrews, voles, and mice remain active, creating tunnels and continuing to forage. This unseen activity is crucial for soil aeration and seed dispersal. The lack of foliage also changes the acoustic dynamics of the park. Sound carries further without the damping effect of the leaves, and the wind profiles change, with gusts reaching deeper into the hollows, drying out the leaf litter and increasing the risk of winter wildfires, a counterintuitive but real phenomenon in the Appalachians. The ecosystems of Shenandoah are strictly partitioned by the edaphic factor, the influence of soil type. This is where geology becomes destiny. On the western slopes, where the Chilhowie Group sandstones weather into sandy, acidic, nutrient-poor soils, the forest is dominated by chestnut oak and heath shrubs like mountain laurel and blueberries. These plants have evolved to tolerate low nutrient availability and high acidity. In contrast, the circumneutral soils derived from the Catoctin greenstone on the central peaks support a rich cove forest. Here, species that require higher levels of calcium and magnesium thrive, such as basswood, white ash, and a dense herbaceous layer of ferns and wildflowers like trillium and black cohosh. This distinction is so sharp that a trained botanist can often determine the underlying bedrock simply by looking at the plant community. The mafic, magnesium and iron-rich, nature of the greenstone also supports disjunct populations of plants that are normally found in the Mississippi Valley, a biological anomaly sustained by the specific mineralogy of the lava flows. Another specialized ecosystem is the rock outcrop community. The sheer cliffs and boulder fields create a harsh, xeric dry environment that mimics a desert. The temperature fluctuations here are extreme. Rock surfaces can exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit in summer and drop well below freezing in winter. The plants that survive here, such as the rock polypody fern and the Allegheny stonecrop, utilize crassulation acid metabolism, or other drought-tolerance strategies. Cam plants open their stomata at night to collect carbon dioxide, storing it as acid, and then photosynthesize during the day with their pores closed to prevent water loss. This physiological adaptation allows them to colonize the vertical deserts of the park, where forest trees cannot grow. These outcrops are also critical basking habitats for the timber rattlesnake and the copperhead, ectotherms that rely on the solar gain of the heated rock to regulate their metabolism. The riparian ecosystems, the interfaces between land and stream, are the arteries of the park. The vegetation here is distinct, dominated by moisture-loving species like sycamore, yellow birch, and spicebush. These zones are critical for energy transfer. The allochthonous input, leaves and twigs falling from the land into the water, provides the base of the aquatic food chain, but the transfer goes both ways. When aquatic insects hatch and emerge, they transfer energy from the stream back to the forest, feeding spiders, birds, and bats. This reciprocal flow of energy makes the riparian zone one of the most productive habitats in the park. The geology of the stream bed dictates the type of riparian zone. Steep, boulder-choked channels in the greenstone create narrow, shaded corridors, while lower gradient streams over shale allow for wider floodplains and more sunlight penetration. Beneath the surface, the hydrogeology creates a cryptic ecosystem in the fracture zones. The Blue Ridge rocks do not have large cave systems like the Limestone Valley, but they are heavily fractured. Groundwater moves through these cracks, sometimes remaining underground for years before resurfacing at a spring. This groundwater is home to specialized organisms called stygobites, blind, colorless crustaceans, and invertebrates adapted to life in total darkness. The chemistry of the spring water reflects its residence time and the rock it traveled through. Springs emerging from the Catoctin Formation are often less acidic than those from the quartzite, providing distinct microhabitats where they emerge. The thermal stability of these springs, remaining at the mean annual temperature of roughly 50 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, creates thermal refugia in the streams. In the heat of summer, brook trout congregate near these cool seeps. In the winter, the relative warmth keeps the water from freezing, allowing for year-round biological activity. The interaction between the atmosphere and the ecosystem is heavily influenced by the boundary layer, the layer of air immediately adjacent to the leaves and the ground. In the dense forests of Shenandoah, the canopy decouples the forest floor from the atmosphere above. Wind speeds are dramatically reduced, and humidity is conserved. This creates a stable, moist microclimate, essential for the survival of the plethodontid salamanders. However, disturbances that break the canopy, whether from ice storms, insect outbreaks, or wind throw, disrupt this boundary layer. Sunlight penetrates to the floor, temperature rises, and humidity drops. This edge effect can extend hundreds of feet into the forest, altering the species composition and drying out the leaf litter. The resilience of the salamander populations depends on the continuity of the canopy and the presence of coarse woody debris, rotting logs, which act as moisture reservoirs during these dry periods. The concept of ecological memory is embedded in the landscape. The soil profile itself records the history of the land. In many parts of the park, there is an AP horizon, a plow layer. This is a distinct, homogenized layer of topsoil created by decades of plowing by the mountain residents. Even 80 years after the cessation of farming, this layer persists, affecting water infiltration and root growth. In some areas, the soil chemistry still shows elevated levels of phosphorus from historical manuring. The current distribution of tulip poplars, a shade-intolerant species, often maps perfectly onto these abandoned agricultural fields. The natural forest we see is actually a successional response to this specific land use history, a living map of the farms that once dotted the ridges. The recovery of the soil horizons. The reformation of natural stratification is a process that takes centuries, meaning the ecosystem is still in the early stages of healing from its agricultural past. The vastness of the geological timeline versus the brevity of the biological seasons creates a juxtaposition that defines the park. The rocks speak of billion-year cycles of assembly and destruction, of oceans opening and closing. The flora and fauna speak of the immediate urgency of the season, the race to bloom, to mate, to migrate, to store fat. Yet the two are locked together. The ancient lava flow determines the calcium in the soil that strengthens the snail's shell, which provides the calcium for the wood thrush's egg. The fracture in the billion-year-old granite directs the spring that sustains the brook trout. The high elevation created by the tectonic thrust allows the red spruce to survive the warming climate. In Shenandoah, the geology is not just the stage. It is the script, the director, and the supporting cast for the biological drama that plays out every day in the shadow of the Blue Ridge. And so the park leans forward through time. What seems immutable continues to tilt, crack, and lift, quietly preparing the conditions for lives not yet arrived. Seasons will keep quickening and retreating, species will adjust their calendars or vanish from them, and the mountains will remain, changing slowly enough to feel like permanence, yet never still. The future of this place will not be decided in a single warming decade or a single resilient species, but in the long conversation between stone and seed, pressure and patience. To walk here is to stand inside that conversation, to realize that every footstep is momentary, yet carried by forces vast enough to outlast memory, and that what endures is not stasis, but the capacity to become something next.